Okay, so let's start with the next chapter in this series is the portfolio performance evaluation. This is in continuation to the other parts that we have seen of this chapter, trading and performance evaluation. So we did the trading part in the previous video. We'll now do the portfolio performance evaluation. So we know that the three parts of any performance evaluation of how the portfolio or the fund manager is performing is basically first to measure how the portfolio is performing both on an absolute and a relative basis. The second is to do the attribution analysis of the performance. What are the sources of over and under performance? And then third is the understanding how do you do the appraisal analysis or appraisal measurement of that fund manager or the portfolio manager. So first thing, a measurement is something that we come back when we do the computation of the portfolio with an example. The return and risk attribution is impact of active management on returns and risk. So return attribution is basically breaking down the returns into allocation, selection, and interaction effect. And risk attribution is how much risk active management has contributed to the overall risk. See, because if you're doing a passive management, what you'll do, you'll buy the index or you'll do passive investments. So your risk is low. But when you're doing active management, the risk goes high. So risk attribution means how much risk or what is the impact on risk because of your active management of the portfolio. Then there are two types of attribution. We have learned this in L2 also, micro and macro. So as the name suggests, micro is basically performance of the portfolio and seeing the sources of return. So how the fund manager is performing for each portfolio or each fund. And macro is at the fund sponsor level, which analyzes the basic deviation between the SAA and TAA. So SAA is the strategic asset allocation. Say suppose you go, you look for the fund house. Say suppose JP Morgan fund or say Mirae Asset Fund. So over there, the fund house at the fund house level, at the institutional level, there will be some strategic asset allocation that they must have decided. And due to the market conditions, they must have shifted their investments to current cyclical in products or commodities or those kind of stocks which will benefit them. So this allows you to see the deviation from the strategic asset allocation. What is the current deviation and analyze what are the reasons for that. So what are the three types of attribution? So we learned that the attribution analysis is basically the breaking down of the returns into smaller parts or smaller sections. So the first one is the return based attribution, which is the easiest to implement, least reliable, and highly manipulative. So the advantage is easiest to implement, and the disadvantage it is very less reliable and very manipulative. Mostly used for hedge funds. Return of the index are regressed against portfolio returns and can't detect style difference. So these are the disadvantages. Why is it so? It's simple. Let us understand what is the uh, return based. So in the under the return based, actual holding of the portfolio is not taken. Only the stock name is taken. Say suppose you take stock A, stock B, stock C. How much allocation you had to that is not taken. Only how the stock has performed historically has been taken. So that is why it's a return based attribution. The opposite of that will be holding based attribution. It is the basis actual beginning of period holdings, but it has a downfall that it doesn't consider any interim transactions. So suppose you are seeing a 6 monthly performance of a portfolio, the holding based attribution will be the based on the holding that the stock had in the first month, the beginning of the period. And it is generally used by passive funds, but it is better than the return based benchmark to identify any style drift. What is a style drift? So style drift is basically suppose you have a fund manager who claims that he is looking for large cap growth stocks, large cap growth stocks. But if you analyze, you do the attribution for the fund for 1 year or 2 year, you will find that this fund manager, though he's claiming to be in large cap, his attribution analysis reveal that he is in mid cap growth stocks. Most of his assets are in mid cap growth stock. So this is a style change. This is a style change. And when can you identify this style change? Only when you do the attribution, micro and macro. So once you do the holding based attribution, you will be able to detect any style different. Over here, you will not be able to do in the return based. Why? Because over here we are not taking any other attribute. We are just taking what is the return of that stock. We are not taking the market cap. We are not taking the holding percentage of the portfolio. This is the best method, transaction based attribution. It includes all actual portfolio holdings, including the interim transaction between beginning and ending period. Since it includes all the transaction, obviously it will be time consuming, because if you run an attribution for, say, suppose 1,000 funds for a year, including each transaction that the fund has performed, it's going to be time consuming. And since it's time consuming, it is expensive to implement. So when we say expensive to implement, is basically the outcome that you will get from this will be the best that will help you to do the attribution. But the time it takes to get over there and the iterations it takes to get over there is basically a lot in compared to the holding based and return based. So these are the advantages and disadvantages of all the three methods. Then we go to the approaches to return attribution. So first one is very simple: arithmetic, return of portfolio minus return of benchmark, and geometric is the arithmetic return divided by the return that you have earned on the benchmark. So 1 plus benchmark return. So this is first method, the mathematical method. Second is the Brinson method. We have done this all our CFA career. Allocation is weight of the portfolio minus weight of the benchmark into return of that sector from the benchmark. Selection effort will be opposite. When you do allocation, you take weights. When you do selection, you take returns. Obviously, since you're taking returns over here, you will multiply it with the weight. Again, this is the weight of that sector in the benchmark. Interaction effect is basically a multiplication of both the LHS. So any amount, any return which is not computed by the allocation and selection effect will come under the interaction effect. So interaction effect is basically the residual effect or the residual return because of the combination of the allocation and selection effect. So it's it's that way easy to understand. It's the residual term. We also have, so what we have seen is first is the arithmetic attribution. We have seen that the mathematical attribution, arithmetic and geometric. The second is the Brinson method. We have seen this so many times: allocation, selection, and interaction effect. Then we have the factor based method. We have seen this, the Carhart model, the Pharma French model. So these models we have seen in level 1, level 2 also. It is basically the return of the portfolio. The expected return can be broken down into risk free return plus alpha plus risk premium over risk free rate of the market rate. Then small minus big, that is small cap minus large cap. Then high book value to minus low book value, that is a value tilt. Winners minus losers, this is the momentum. And this is the unexplained return, the error term or the residual term. So this is the market risk premium, this is the size premium, this is the book value premium, and this will be the momentum premium. Got it? So let's understand, if you are looking for a growth strategy in small cap, so what will be your tilt? Your beta will be 1 for this and 0 for others, because this is small cap growth strategy. You need to have a growth tilt. Then you suppose you have a value tilt, then this will become 0, all other will become 0, this will become 1, because this is high book value minus low book value. And you have a momentum strategy for short term trading, then this will become 1, this will become 0. So this is in attribution. This can help in attribution as to identify what are the causes of returns. Is it from the risk free return? Is it because of the size of the stocks that you have taken? Have the small cap outperform the large cap? Have the value stocks outperform the growth stock? Is the momentum in favor of the portfolio? So this helps you to identify those factors. So in nutshell, there are three things that you need to understand. First is the arithmetic way of breaking down your returns. Second is the attribution analysis, the Brinson method. And third is attribution using the factors. Which factors are responsible for your returns? Got it? Let's move on. So that was for the equity attribution. Now there is a big difference between fixed income and equity attribution. Equities will be mostly price based, and fixed income will be mostly interest rate based, or duration rate based. I will take a darker sketch. Yes. So over here there are three methods: exposure decomposition, yield curve decomposition. Under yield curve there is duration based and full price based. Not a big difference. I'll just explain you in very simple terms. So exposure decomposition is basically top down duration based segregation and attribution. So based on the duration of the individual ISINs or the individual securities in the portfolio, the top down analysis is done. Then the yield curve decomposition, duration based, can be both bottom and top up. It is more complex that it involves benchmark attribution too. The total return is income return, which is your coupon, plus price return. Obviously, price return, we know that it is duration into change in YTM. In terms of duration, we know that change in price is minus duration and is change in YTM. If it was convexity based, then we could have included the convexity term also over here. That is 1 by 2 convexity, the whole square, right? But here the analysis is only restricted to duration. We will take the duration formula. Now the interesting thing over here is under the yield curve decomposition, two methods, duration based has been repeated twice. But in the third part, what they're saying, it's a full price based. Uses spot curve to determine price changes. Complex explanation, but it is the best method for attribution. So over here, what they are saying is the duration based method is obviously an approximation, because this will give you an approximation. But if you want to do a full price based this thing, what you need to do is, for doing the analysis, you need to take the ZCYC, which is the zero coupon yield curve, or the par curve, or the spot curve, and discount that spot curve as per your holdings to current market price, to current present value, and determine the price changes using the discount factor. But obviously, since this is time consuming, using all the yield curve and spot curves and all these things, so it is expensive to implement, but it is the best method. So three methods for fixed income attribution: exposure decomposition. You should read the examples from the book. It's very simple. This will help you in the exam. Duration yield curve decomposition could be both duration based and full price based. So full price based uses the spot curve, and this uses the duration based change in price. I think so. So this is how the fixed income attribution is done. So in our book, it is not given in detail, but if you want to learn it for your own knowledge, please go and read about the Campisi model. Campisi model. Once you read about the Campisi model, you don't need to come back to the book and read all these things. This is inclusive of all the methods that have been mentioned over here. So we move on to the next slide. So this is an interesting thing. We will learn this. So we know that whenever you're doing an attribution, it can be absolute, that is on portfolio basis, or it could be relative, that is with respect to a benchmark, right? with respect to a benchmark. So we'll first see the risk attribution. So we'll first see the risk attribution. So there are three methods. Obviously, we have seen this: bottom up, top down, and factor based. So what will happen if it is compared to a benchmark, and what happens if it's compared to a absolute basis? So what is the risk of the portfolio? Standard deviation is one of the risk metrics. Value at risk is one of the risk metrics. Volatility is one of the risk metrics. So on and so forth. Downside deviation could be one of the risk metrics. So these are the multiple risk metrics that we usually encounter in our uh, measurement. But what we are going to do over here is, for the absolute, we are going to focus on the tracking error, which is the standard deviation of the difference of the returns of the portfolio and the benchmark. And absolute is basically total risk. In this case, it could be standard deviation. So if it's a bottom up process, so when we have a portfolio of securities, say B, C, D, when you're going bottom up, which is the lowest level, it is the security, right? It is the stock or the bond that you are attributing. So when you're doing a bottom up, it is securities marginal contribution to active risk, securities marginal contribution to active risk. And what is the active risk over here? We have discussed that for relative basis, we use tracking error as the active risk. And suppose you want to do the portfolio analytics, the risk analytics only on absolute basis, only at the portfolio level, then it will be marginal contribution to the risk minus total risk. Marginal contribution to the risk. Because now you're doing absolute basis, so you don't need a tracking error. Because when you're doing it against a benchmark, you need to do a tracking error. But now you're doing only against the portfolio. So the security over here, the same word, security is marginal contribution to the total risk. For example, if you want to understand this, just see that you might have a portfolio of say four assets A, B, C, D. So what, and this has a standard deviation of say, suppose, let me say it's a 5% risk that it has. Okay. So when I say securities MCAR in relative basis, then what is the total change in the tracking error if I increase this security by 1%? Example, change in the T. And when you see the absolute, then what is the total change in the standard deviation if I increase the security percentage by 1% or decrease it by 1%? Got it? So it's basically the impact on the tracking error due to change in the position of a security for relative, and impact on the standard deviation due to the change in the position of a security absolute. What will top down be? Top down will be opposite, because now you have done the security part. The top down has to be from a sector perspective. So attributing the tracking error to allocation and selection effect. Top down does not matter over here to absolute basis, because over here you are not comparing it with the sector. And if it's a factor based, then what are the factors? Marginal contribution to total and active specific risk. This term we have learned in portfolio management in level 2 also, and you are in level 3 also. So when we say factors based, it is, let us go back to this one. So suppose I have a portfolio which has 10% allocation to small cap stocks. So what is the impact on the tracking error if I increase my allocation to small cap stocks by 1%? That is what is mentioned over here. Factors marginal contribution to total and active specific risk. Okay. I hope I was clear. Just to summarize, it is basically, for simplicity purpose, just understand what is the impact on the tracking error for 1% change in any security, and what is the impact on standard deviation of the portfolio for 1% change in the security weightage. This will become your bottom up. Similarly, what is the impact, or what is the percentage change that can be attributed to allocation and selection effect, that if you go top down. And third is basically factor based. What will be the change in tracking error? Say suppose if I change my allocation from small cap, if I change my allocation to 11% for from 10%. Suppose I have a allocation of 10% in small cap stocks, small cap. I change it to 11%. Obviously, I'm taking on more risk because I'm investing in small cap growth stocks. So if I'm changing it from 10 to 11, what is the impact of this change on the tracking error if we am comparing it with the benchmark? And what is the impact of this change on the standard deviation for the absolute portfolio risk? I hope I was clear. So this was the risk attribution. Now we come to the return attribution. So return attribution is most of the items are same. Okay. Always remember that asset owners always have a long term SAA. So if a pension fund is sponsored by a government will have a strategic asset allocation, say 75% debt, 25% equity, example, or vice versa, whatever. But investment managers, the one who are managing it, they need to implement TAA so as to exploit the market conditions. But in the long term, their TAA will be aligned to the SAA. Okay. So when you're doing a macro attribution, there's one change in the formula that we had seen earlier in the Brinson method. So this is the that was the Brinson method. This is also Brinson method, but another person contributed to this Brinson Falcher method. I hope that's a spelling. It's the Brinson Falcher method. So the only change that you need to notice is over here the allocation effect is WP minus WP into RB, that is the return of the benchmark. This was common in the last this thing also. But over here you deduct the benchmark return over here. So let us compare the formulas. 1 minute. Okay. So here was in the micro attribution, what we were doing is allocation effect. WP minus WP into RI. RI is the sector return for the benchmark. The formula remains same over here when you're doing macro attribution. Till here it remains the same. The additional term is we deduct the return of the benchmark also from this, because here we are doing macro attribution and I want to know how much this sector has contributed, the allocation to this sector has contributed with respect to the total benchmark return. So here R benchmark is the total benchmark returns and RB is the benchmark return for that sector. So formula remains same till here. Only one change is you have to deduct the benchmark returns over here when you are doing macro attribution. Always remember this when you are doing macro attribution. Rest of the formulas are same as previous attribution analysis. So your selection and interaction effect will be same, which is this formula. Only the allocation effect changes because when you're doing a macro attribution, you need to know how much the sector has outperformed the benchmark. So these were all asset-based benchmarks. So yesterday we learned that if you're managing assets for a sponsor or a fund plan or anyone, then you are you will use an asset-based benchmark. Let's say suppose S&P 500 or Nifty 50. But if you are doing a liability-based fund management, wherein you are managing the fund to fund the future liabilities, so you will use liability benchmarks. Like so, liability benchmarks could be different types that we are going to understand now. So we'll first see the asset-based benchmark and what does a benchmark mean and how does one understand or finalize that okay this benchmark can be used for any purposes. Okay. So first we have covered that liability based benchmark in the previous video also. It is simple that for any fund manager or a portfolio manager who are managing assets to fund the future liabilities, they cannot compare themselves with S&P 500. because S&P 500 is an asset based benchmark, so they need to compare themselves with a liability based benchmark, which could be risk free rate, which could be some target return, that minimum this much return should be available, or it could be inflation linked. So those things are mentioned in the book. You can go and read. It's just one or two pages. So I'm not concentrating on this more. So this part comes in the asset in the essay part of our exam. I have seen some past papers. So this asset based benchmark comes in the AM section. So this becomes important for us. So what are the types of asset benchmarks? Absolute, broad market indices, style, factor based, return based, universe of managers, and custom security based. We have read all about this. Absolute, we did this. Broad market based, style index, factor, we did the Carhart model. We did the return based indexing. And this is again, these two are like custom benchmarks. Okay. So let us understand the advantages and disadvantages of all the types of benchmark. Absolute, it is target based, easy to manage, but it is not investable. I can have an absolute benchmark. Say tomorrow morning, I can get up and call my wealth manager that I need 8% return from my portfolio. So the manager will say, okay, fine, this is I take your point, it is 8% return, but how are you going to compare this? You have no comparison, right? Because you're not telling him that I need 1% more than what Nifty is giving, or you're not telling him that I need zero point 0.5 basis more than what is S&P giving. You're telling him that I need an 8% benchmark. Since it's an absolute benchmark, right? And 8% does not define anything. So it's not investable for the general public or other fund managers or peer groups, because you might not have the same situation, and always you need a comparability with the market forces, right? If I say I need 8%, and if in the S&P is giving me 4%, this 8% is not logical, only because the market is trading at 4%. And if you want 8%, you need to obviously shift your asset classes from equity to say hedge funds, right? Because the market forces, the index is at 4%, you are targeting 8%. So whenever you give any absolute target, it does not become investable for anyone. Broad market indices organized, investable, available, and measurable. Obviously, S&P is an example, Nifty is an example. So these are broad market indices, and these are available for investments, measurable. The only disadvantage is that the style might not match. Okay, this is very easy to understand, but very crucial also. If you take the example of Indian benchmark Nifty, Nifty has 50 stocks, but over 35% of those stocks belong to the banking sector. Belong to the banking sector, and within the banking sector, these there are one or two mid caps, and all others are large cap, or maybe ultra large cap and large caps. But that's not the point. The point is the investment. The entire Nifty, 35% of the Nifty is represented by banks. Now this might not be investable for most of all the fund managers. Fund managers might not like that much exposure to a particular sector. So it is organized, it is investable, available, and measurable, the broad market indices, but it might or might not match with the style of the fund manager. Then is the style based benchmark, large cap and small cap growth and value. So you can have four benchmarks: large cap growth, large cap value, small cap growth, small cap value. From level 1 and level 2, we know growth means high PE, growth means high PE, and value means higher book value. Higher book value than the current market price is value. So you can have four styles. Again, this is available, accepted, investable, but can lead to concentrated positions. Can lead to concentrated positions, because let us take the very same example of Nifty. In Nifty, 35% of your stocks belong to the banking sector. And if it is large cap growth, the strategy is large cap growth, and say 20% of those banks are falling into this, you will have an concentrated position, right? So this can lead to a concentrated position, and different nomenclature results in different allocations, because certain countries will not define those as large cap. Certain countries will define a different threshold for being a large cap stock. So it depends on which what kind of nomenclature it is. Say maybe in India 1 trillion, maybe the large cap. the definition of a large cap, and US it might not be. So it depends on what nomenclature the market is following. Fourth is the factor based. We have read this, the Carhart model that we have used for investment performance analysis. It is not intuitive, ambiguous, and model may be inconsistent. Now let me take you back to that model over here. Yes. So this model that we are talking about now, it is not intuitive. If you go to a normal person and explain him this thing, it's not intuitive, right? Even from a definition perspective, theoretically it looks good, but when you implement it, does not make an intuitive sense, right? And since it's a mathematical model, right? At the end, it's a mathematical model derived by someone using some input data. If the data itself is wrong, your output will be wrong. The problem of GIGO. So this could lead to model inconsistency. Also, the model might give you different results when the expectation is different, and it can give you inconsistent results because at the end it's a mathematical model. So anything which is based on a mathematical model needs to be model validated, using hundreds and thousands of out of sample data. So that's the reason it is not intuitive, and model may become inconsistent after certain iterations or maybe after out of sample data is tested. Then return based benchmark, we have already understood that we did the return based benchmark over here. Easiest to implement, least reliable, highly manipulative. We all know this, so it's the same repetition over here. Since it's highly manipulative, it cannot be directly used for investments, and it is basically a disadvantage. Manager universe is measurable. So what happens over here? Suppose in the Indian fund industry, you have top 10 fund managers, example, and all those top 10 fund managers, some returns are given, and you have an index of top 10 fund managers. You can take this index as the benchmark, and you can benchmark your performance against this. So it's measurable in that sense because all fund managers will have some returns that they're given. But it is prone to survivorship bias and hence cannot be acceptable as a benchmark. Why? See, you can have a fund manager who during the market boom performed well and he reached the fourth spot. Example. And now when you're churning out the report, this fund manager was invested in some company which bankrupted and he had some higher allocation to that company. This fund manager is now at the 15th position, right? So he has not survived the top 10 index. He's out of that index. What you're seeing over here is only those fund managers which have survived this for the entire period. So it is falling under the survivorship bias. Anything which has a bias is not investable as a benchmark. Okay. Custom security based is measurable, investable. This is what MSCI and JP Morgan and Moody's, all these guys do. They make custom benchmarks for you based on your investment style, objective, and analysis. So one thing that is repetitively asked across all questions in the AM section and also in the CFA curriculum, especially in the AM section, is what is a valid benchmark. So for this, I have created a short form samurai. So just remember this samurai, specified in advance, appropriate as per the style, measurable, unambiguous, reflective of the opinion, accountable, and investable. So you remember this samurai, specified in advance, appropriate, obviously it has to be measurable, unambiguous, reflective of the style, accountability, and investability. So samurai is the short form that you have to remember. Let's move on. So important concepts, very simple concepts. P is equal to M plus S plus A is the portfolio returns, where M is the return on the market index, S is the benchmark index minus market index, and asset is active return is the portfolio return minus benchmark return. So we know that active return is portfolio return minus benchmark return. So the A term is active return. M is the return on market index, that is the market data. And what is S? S is the benchmark index minus market index. H is the benchmark index minus market index. So what is the P that we are trying to compute over here? Why is this important, and why is this short formula is very important for your understanding? See, what happens is a portfolio return should be broken down into multiple factors. So if a portfolio manager is earning, say suppose he is earning 5%, okay. So the P term over here is 5%, and say for that matter, just say that the index or the benchmark itself is giving 2%. So your M becomes 2. For time being, I'm not putting anything in S, and I'm assuming that due to the active management of the portfolio, the fund manager is able to get 2% out of this. Fund manager is able to get 2% out of portfolio return and is the benchmark return. Now you don't know this term S, right? You don't know the term S. S over here is the excess return due to the style, right? So you can compute S. S is 1. Why? Because you have the market index return and you have the active return. Active return is portfolio return minus benchmark return. So what is S? S, how do you arrive at S? You simply do 5 minus 4. 5 minus 4, right? 5% is equal to 2%, which is coming from the market index. S, I don't know what is S. That is excessive return due to the style. And A is the active management, active return. So in this sense, S is basically difference between the manager's style and the benchmark style. So in this way, you can understand the formula. Okay, so till now we were talking about traditional asset classes, equity and fixed income. Let us talk about the alternative asset classes. What kind of benchmarks can be used? So for hedge funds, you can use a risk-free rate, a broad market index, a peer group. But all these have a challenges of style, relevance, and transparency. See, risk-free rate is basically a hedge fund. Say a long short fund. A long short fund. If you're long and short on an asset, what will you earn? You will earn the risk-free rate because you're not taking any risk. You're long and short on the asset. So RFR becomes your benchmark. If the hedge fund is slightly diversified, a broad market index can become. But if the hedge fund is not really transparent, it's quite opaque. So you need to take the peer group. If it's a real estate hedge fund or a real estate based fund. So the peer group, how they are performing, that will become your benchmark. But all these have challenges of relevance and transparency because hedge funds that is the nature of hedge funds, right? If it becomes transparent and it becomes liquid, then it will behave like an equity. So let's move to the next one. Just facing some problem with this one. Okay. Okay. Second is the real estate. Real estate has a bias. Obviously, I'll make you understand. Then it has a large value bias, sample data, wrong assumptions, and lack of comparability. What is the large value bias? Say suppose you have 10 properties in your index. Example. I'm just giving an example. And this one is for say $100 million, and all others are say $20 million, $10 million, $5 million. Because this is based on the criteria of the size, the portfolio index will be skewed towards 100. The portfolio value will be skewed towards 100. But if you look at the portfolio, only one asset is of $100 million. All others are 20 million, $15 million. So because of this, there is a large value bias that the index gives. Also, the wrong assumptions, because these are generally these are lagged index. They are not updated very regularly, so the assumptions could be wrong. Again, IRR versus TWRR. Okay. Now, what happens is whenever you're comparing a equity fund to another equity fund, you have the TWRR for both the funds. But now, if you want to compare a real estate fund with an equity fund, it is not comparable because this is IRR, which is your money weighted rate of return. This is your IRR, also known as MWRR, which is your money weighted rate of return. And this is the time weighted rate of return which the equity portfolio is giving. So they are not comparable in that sense. Private equity again, IRR is highly volatile and point reporting loses the comparability. So why is IRR very highly volatile? Let us take an example from the Zomato case. The Naukri.com invested in Zomato is some 8 9 years ago, and they have not seen the profit till date when they actually got listed. When they actually got listed, that time the Naukri.com PE portfolio must have seen the positive IRR, right? Over here they were seeing all negative IRR. So elongated negative IRR, and then the IRR goes really up once it is listed or it becomes liquid. So IRR is highly volatile, and in the initial period is often negative because they are invested in the growth companies which burn a lot of cash. And then it is a point reporting. See, private equity does not have a responsibility of reporting it on quarterly basis, right? They will report whenever asked or whenever they want to, in the sense when they come in public and they talk about it. So it's a point reporting. If they are coming in the month of June, they may come up with the month of June report, but you don't know what happened in the month of Jan. You don't know what happened in the month of April. But if it's a publicly rated company, you can see that in the balance sheet and income statements. So that way it loses the comparability. The fourth asset class is the commodities. Commodities does not have a spot price. They always are traded in futures. So that is one of the non-comparability. And also commodities, since it's always traded in future, it's always leveraged. You cannot have a unleveraged futures. So it's always leverage. It making the returns less comparable. Say suppose you have a 21% margin, 20% margin, and 20% cash and 80% is funded by the broker. Whenever you are trading in the market for commodities, now your own money is only 20. So suppose you earn a return on this for 5% on this commodity, and you have another portfolio which is funded 100% by you. Over there also you earn 5%, but these 5% are not comparable because over here 100% is your money, over here 20% is your money because it's leverage, 80% is provided by the broker or the arranger, and the returns are same. So in this sense, only 20% of your capital got you 5% returns. So returns are magnified. It might be say 100% or whatever it will be. Returns get magnified. Over here, 100% of your own equity give you 5%. So not comparable in that way. Managed derivatives is again stale pricing and biased. Obviously, anything which has related to long short funds or managed derivatives or any hedge funds will always have a stale pricing because these are not transparent enough. And managed derivatives are basically, they use peer group as the benchmark, but since we discussed earlier that peer group as a benchmark is not transparent, so it's too specific in that sense. Distressed security, okay, lack of liquidity, reference benchmark, and security valuation differs. Distressed security, say suppose in India only, let's take an example of distressed security. Let's take an example of DHFL. Now if any company is investing in DHFL or products like DHFL or asset or companies like DHFL, they are going to get initial negative returns until they find any buyer, and once the buyer is bought or the asset is liquidated, their returns will go up. But this is not the normal curve any other portfolio will follow. So they need a benchmark which has distressed securities, right? But what happens? All other company benchmarks or global benchmarks will not be same. They will be different. And especially in distressed security, there's a huge lack of liquidity. There's a huge lack of liquidity. There is no reference benchmark available, and security valuation differs. Okay, like I can say that DHFL is worth zero, but Piramil group of industries, they must have thought some value in that stock, so they went and bought that asset because each one will see the valuation as different when it is a distressed security, because some people will know the future growth of the company. People who are reading the balance sheet will have some different views. So in that sense, distressed security does not have a lot of reference benchmark, and that is the reason the hedge funds or the alternatives in these types of funds are not easy to reference or compare. We come to the last thing is the appraisal ratio. Appraisal ratio is basically to understand how a fund manager is performing. This is quite repetitive from level 1 and level 2. So I'm not covering the Sharpe ratio and the Turner ratio. Okay, I'll just cover on maybe just an introduction. So Sharpe ratio is basically portfolio return minus risk-free return upon your standard deviation of the portfolio. Turner ratio is again the same, RP minus RF. The numerator remains the same, but in the denominator you have the beta of the portfolio. The beta of the portfolio. Sensitivity, systematic risk. Information ratio is the active return upon active risk. So this is IR. We know this from a level 2 very much. Appraisal ratio is the alpha divided by the standard deviation of the error term. Appraisal ratio is the standard alpha divided by the standard deviation of the error term. Sortino ratio is portfolio return minus target return, a minimum acceptable return. So if I say I want 4% from my portfolio, so my RP return say suppose is 5%, and my minimum acceptable return MAR is say suppose 4%, and the downside deviation for this is 2%. Downside deviation means volatility only on the negative side. So my Sortino ratio will become 5 minus 4 divided by 2, which is zero point 0.5. Become 0.5. Capture ratio is basically to understand how your fund manager has performed when the market was moving up, and how your fund manager has performed when the market was moving down. It is the capture ratio upon the downside capture ratio. So the formula for capture ratio itself, the formula for capture ratio itself becomes very important over here. So capture ratio is basically what was so for example, if the benchmark return is 4%, okay, and the portfolio return is 5%, then what is the upside ratio? Upside ratio is 5 divided by 4, because your portfolio has given you more return than the benchmark. So the benchmark is at 4, you have given 5. So your upside capture ratio is 1.25, because benchmark is given 4 and you have got 5% return. That's why you compare upside and capture ratio. Similarly, you capture the downside capture ratio. Drawdown is the total time required to fully recover the maximum loss. This is given in the book. It's very simple. It's very intuitive. I think so. We have covered this. I might not cover the investor manager selection. That is quite theoretical. We are running out of time. So thank you guys.